Good morning, everyone. I'm the Drapery Falls, and I was very excited to share my thoughts on this album from underrated one-man brutal death metal mastermind Dead and Dripping, Nefarious Scintillations. This band creates soundscapes beyond comprehension. They take the foundation of slamming brutal death metal with a multitude of influences ranging from Demilitch to Defeated Sanity and much more, to construct an album bursting with creativity. It's progressive, adventurous, head-spinning, and yet every song is still grounded. If that description butters your egg roll just right, stay tuned to see the rest of this review. Once again, I do not have a camera, so enjoy me playing Hades 2. So I was introduced to this band by a friend. I'd actually never heard of them until yesterday as of writing the script. This came out on November 28th on Transcending Obscurity Records, a very good label, and immediately I was intrigued to check them out for a few reasons. First of all, they're named after a song off of Cryptopsy's None So Vile, and if you watch my video on the top 20 brutal death metal albums of all time, you would know that I hold that album on a high pedestal. It's pretty much peak death metal. So already, I was assuming this band would have a similar aura as Cryptopsy. But then seeing the bands they're often compared to piqued my interest even more. One of them is Mortal Decay. Forensic is one of the most unique and original death metal albums I've ever heard. Rarely do I ever hear a band cited as being similar to Mortal Decay, yet alone actually sounding like them. But Dead and Dripping surprisingly manages to capture a similar twisted, dingy, but also otherworldly feel as Mortal Decay. The other band would be Demilitch, which I wouldn't say is a massive part of their sound, but you do hear it in some of the angular drum grooves. The song titles might give Demilitch a run for their money in terms of length and how absurd they are. They're not your run-of-the-mill gore in medical terms. Let me give you some of my favorites in their discography. Swollen torsos adorned with pustillating hexagonal crania. Kaleidoscopic visions of porous obsidian eternities. Molecular degradation upon warped onyx stoves. Eroded by illusory parasitic invertebrates. Fuck does any of that mean? Some of these are in fact words in the English language. They also use similar sounding frog vocals, but if you're deep into metal, you'd know there is a wide spectrum of froggish vocal styles. They actually do sound a lot like the ones from Mortal Decay, but I think the closest comparison would be the vocals in Repudiation, an often forgotten about but extremely important band in the New York brutal death metal scene. And he runs the gambit of different vocal styles. Sometimes it's a more straightforward low growl in the vein of Cannibal Corpse, he does some more wet-sounding guttural similar to Angel Ochoa, and occasionally it breaks into a raspy shriek. Their aesthetics are also really interesting. The artwork for this reminded me of a mix of Portal and Ulthar. The biblically accurate nether portal on blackened cerebral rifts reminded me of Seraphic Punishment by Maul, and their other releases look similar to a lot of Leviathan's albums. And on top of all that, like I said, all the music on here is done by one guy, which made me genuinely shocked with how technically demanding it is to pull off something like this. One of the words that kept popping into my head as I was listening to this album was psychedelic. This guy is a prodigy when it comes to making metal that sounds like you're hearing it through a portal into a parallel universe. I would compare the vibe on here a lot to fellow New Jersey experimental slam act Dripping, which I'm almost certain was another influence, even the names are similar. This also seems like an outlet for him to express his creativity. These songs are long and they're packed tight with unique musical ideas. They love to use dissonance and breakneck riff changes, but it's all held together with bouncy New York death metal grooves and a unique take on the riffing style we're all too familiar with from Defeated Sanity and Disentomb. It's like a less melodic Lykathea Aflame. This guy, Evan Danielle, is actively playing in 3 other New Jersey-based death metal bands, namely Sentient Horror, also an experimental metal project My Iron Heart, and industrial project Neurovoid. While there is a lot of experimentation on here and a lot of disorienting displays of technicality, I wouldn't say they lose the plot. This is a complaint I have with the more avant-garde and progressive side of the metal world that Dead and Dripping counters very well. There's certain bands that are so focused on dissonance and cluttering their songs with atonal riff salad and weird time signatures to where the songwriting takes a back seat. It's like you have 2 separate pieces and they mix like oil and water. You have one piece that's an actual structured song and then all the jumbled mess of spontaneous guitar fluff and pseudo-jazz fusion drum sections that distract you from the actual main rhythm of the song. So instead of bobbing your head the entire time, you do it for a few seconds here and there, and then you have to figure out how you're actually supposed to move to it. You're asking yourself if the passage you just heard is actually beneficial to the song or if it's just a random one-off that exists to fill space. Is this progressing the song forward? Is it important in fleshing out the skeleton of the song? Will they come back to that part I was just moving to, or will they abandon it entirely? I am a giant Wormed fan, but if I'm being honest, I ran into this problem a lot with their later albums. Bands like Defeated Sanity just barely walk the line in between these two. They are overflowing with musical wizardry that cannot be contained. Lily Gruber is basically the death metal Danny Carey, and even if you can't digest it all on first listen, there's still a well-planned structure to all their songs, and they manage to hold your attention the entire way through. Dead and Dripping is better at this. While on the surface level their songs do follow a structure, And the riffs at their core are relatively easy to get into and they're generally groove-oriented. They're at the same time packed full of intricacies and nuance. The riffs are never stagnant, they're constantly moving and flowing with the song. The technicality is used to draw your attention instead of detracting from it, and make it more engaging for the listener. That is, if we're talking about these songs on an individual level. See, each song introduces new ideas and does a pretty good job at exploring them and fleshing out the details. But taking a step back and looking at this album as a whole, it can get messy. Your attention is jolted in a bunch of different directions, and it's hard to get a picture for what this band really is until you've listened to this album all the way through. This album kind of sounds like a collaboration. Like it doesn't sound like it's entirely written by the same band. I'm trying not to sound pretentious, hopefully I explained that well. Slam parts, especially when they're used frequently, can often be very stale and samey, but Dead and Dripping has a lot of riffs that take the essence of slam and make it much more interesting. They take what would ordinarily be a simple chug pattern and they expand on that idea, and they do a lot with very little to work with. One of my favorite parts of this album is the bass. It's weaved in really well with the drums and guitar, and it shares the spotlight. It's always bringing new surprises and adds an entirely new layer of depth. They're also constantly changing up the bass tone and effects to create new sonic textures. The production on this album is very organic. It's like halfway between a demo and a professionally mixed album. Everything is well balanced and it's well produced, but they just didn't mess with it too much. They left in all the human elements. The album opens up with nefariously scintillating through vacant galactic reservoirs. First few seconds are an ambient intro that sets you up for the descent into cryptic innumerable parallels you're about to be subjected to. It's basically white noise and these odd distorted sounds. The first time it repeats, it sounds like scratching on a turntable, and the following times it reminded me of noises that would play on those uncomfortable headphones when you're getting your hearing checked. It also reminded me of this. Grows in pitch and intensity, and the guitar fuzz gets louder, and then we're greeted with a somewhat straightforward groove that instantly hooks you. They slightly alter this riff every time it's repeated, as they do a lot throughout this album. The rhythm section is held down well. The drums aren't totally in sync with the guitars, they're slightly off by a tasteful degree. And the bass cuts through the guitars a lot and adds a lot of texture and variety. The riff tags in the faster moments reminded me a lot of Immolation. In the middle there's an extremely bouncy bass line, and the guitars are playing this heavy breakdown style riff that just kind of drifts into the background. They were intense and high energy before, and now they're suddenly nodding off. But they pick it back up pretty quick. In the back half, there's a catchy tremolo riff that shows up with another interesting bass tone mimicking it, and it ends with a great solo. I love the way they transition into different parts of it. There's at least 3 unique pieces to this solo, and they all lay on the last note to ease into each other. This is also one of the more normal sounding leads in this thing. They get pretty wild from here. Track 2 is horrifying glimpses of inconceivably demented cityscapes. I believe they're talking about Spokane, Washington. We get straight into dramatic pinch harmonics and pounding synchronized chug and kick drum patterns, and this hollow bass that mimics it in an almost mocking tone. The first minute of this song is a massive hulking groove, and then it gets straight into prog metal territory, with these blazing, constantly shifting angular riffs. We then drop back down to that groove and the lead guitar takes center stage. It immediately catches your attention, being much more epic than the previous solo. It's short-lived, but it absolutely wails and moves all over the neck, and just does whatever it wants and sounds incredible doing it. After dropping out for a few measures, the lead guitar is brought back in, this time in the form of a quiet, crawling tremolo that slowly rises and gets more layered until it starts to take over the entire mix. Pestilent hints of darkened, melodious vibrations has his glistening chorus guitar over the heavy guitar foundation that's joined front and center with a very prominent bass. Like they're both splitting the work and creating this woozy, dissonant melody. The first half of this song follows a repeating Discord-style riff that's spliced together with some very ear-catching guitar flourishes. The drums have the perfect balance of dissonance, where even though overall it's a very different pattern than what the guitars are doing, they still sync up with each of the palm-muted notes during that disgorgy part, and then go back out of sync in between where the guitar is also doing its own thing. The slams in the song are also very creative, and they go from earworm down-picked chugs to surprisingly fitting melodic tags, as well as pinch harmonics and slides and even a few tremolos. The slap bass also fits in perfectly here. The back half of the song gets downright menacing. There are these pounding, suffocating riffs accented with slightly distant sounding harmonics, and the way they ring out some of the notes gives it even more weight. They keep simplifying the riff, making it slower and more ruthless, and then at the last few seconds, this high-pitched spiraling guitar comes in out of nowhere that sounds like a cackling demon. Swollen torsos adorned with pustillating hexagonal crania is a 9-minute epic that shows off this guy's skills to not only dizzy you with a blitz of scathing riffs, but also his skill to craft an enthralling soundscape. It's impressive that he's able to make something this creative and comprehensive in the otherwise limiting genre of brutal death metal. He manages to sprinkle in so much melody and these ringing, ominous chords on top of a dense maze of riffs. It's almost hard to keep up with, but if you were to break it down piece by piece, you'd see that what's being played is much more straightforward than you'd think. The chord progressions all make a lot of sense, and they're introduced very deliberately to construct this unique cavernous atmosphere. I also like how the echoing vocals slowly shift from ear to ear. It gradually morphs into triplet chugs and tangled spiraling riffs. In the last third of the song, big open chords and urgent drums transition into hazy, off-kilter death doom. I like that you can hear the scratching on the strings during the pick slides. I know I just mentioned Symbolic by Death in my Perdition Temple review, but possibly the heaviest riff on the song, which they hammer out for a while, reminded me of the intro of that song. When this riff comes in, we get a solo that's inventive guitar wizardry. This screaming dual guitar, which utilizes a lot of chilling effects, reminded me of Adam Jones. There's a lot of dive bombs and trippy use of whammy bar. It's interesting the way it phases the volume in and out. Sometimes it's directly in your ear, other times it's barely audible. The whole thing gave me this hair-raising and oddly nostalgic feeling that I can't put into words. Sickening, vague, anatomical silhouettes is a disturbing and unsettling piece that doesn't even surpass the 2-minute mark. It fades in with a riff that's a mix of noisy guitar scratching that blends in with thundering low notes that are accented with the strung-out bass and drums, to give it an especially stomping and lumbering sound. Ominous lead guitar drives the song and gives off the feel of a death rattle. And there's a weirdly quiet, distorted sound that's vaguely vocal and sounds like a distant muttering. That gives way to the actual vocals, which are a deep, repeating monologue. It's like these are the sounds happening in the mind of an insane person. Spontaneous recollections of unwitnessable atrocity. A much more chaotic and disorienting composition with non-stop riff transitions. It starts out sounding more like Defeated Sanity, with a technical and slightly jazzy sound and the bass bubbling over the guitars. Then it quickly goes into frantic downpicking with constant pinch harmonics. Suddenly a bass break shows up that has this trebly, spacey hollow tone. And that bass merges with the guitar and carries the rest of the song. Both of these tones mix in such a way which gives the riffs a strangely bright, shimmering quality. In Seeping Through Ancient Transdimensional Corridors, the bass tone is even scratchier and more staticky. Again, this song gets really frantic and trippy, and the really high, piercing harmonics almost clip the mix, like it can't contain itself. There's a weird, sour, squawking noise that's played very frequently throughout the song, and I can't tell if it's a sample played over some of the bass notes, or if it's a sound created by the bass itself. The midpoint has a big Atheist vibe with more mid-paced grooves, some chromatic chords, and another impressive solo which also reminded me a lot of Atheist. It's less sinister and haunting than the rest of the leads on the album, which makes it seem more comforting. Like this is the one sliver of light in a void of darkness. It sort of teases you because right after this, it sounds like they're about to go into a big slam. But no, right back into an assault of chaotic, scorching riffs for the rest of the song. I would prefer if they did more with that slam section. It ends with a long, reverb-drenched, multi-tracked guttural, which sounds a lot like the hidden track Burble off of Disgorge's Cranial Impalement. The closing track, An Utterly Tenantless World of Aeons-Long Death, actually opens with Spanish guitar, right before launching into blunt force riffs and some cool Cannibal Corpse-style growls that alternate between both ears. A lot of the song is decidedly more old-school death metal in nature, and I'm picking up on even more influences from Cynic and Atheist, only mixed in with brutal death metal. The guitar writing has an absolute field day with a number of dexterous riffs per minute, and just all the weird ways he decides to harmonize a number of different parts and add in a plethora of interesting techniques. And yet it somehow still manages to be catchy and doesn't lose focus. The cymbal work also stood out to me. He peppers in a lot of cool ghost notes, and overall the rhythm section has the right balance of dissonance and synchronicity. The song fades out with another hazy, dreamy solo, with the last couple of whining notes slowly drift into the distance. At points it even sounded like chiptune, weirdly enough. Overall, this album was a cryptic, distorted maze that managed to find order amongst a vast abyss of chaos. This was an interesting exploration of interdimensional death metal with innumerable forms. While it wasn't the most cohesive listen as a complete package, it was extremely engaging. There were a ton of creative ideas that maybe weren't put together in the most graceful or seamless way, but I loved getting to hear how they were explored and fleshed out throughout every song on the album. I definitely need to go back and listen to the rest of their discography if it sounds anything like this. This band is extremely underrated, they definitely deserve more attention, so if you like this review, make sure to give this band a listen, share their music, and support them. I'm giving Nefarious Scintillations an 8.5 out of 10. Sorry, I did not expect this review to take so long, I apologize for that. I did not realize how dense this one would be and how much content I would have to go over. They did more with 44 minutes than most bands do with a full hour. But if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more content just like this. Check out my other videos and make sure to leave a comment. Did you like this album? If so, what was your favorite track? Mine was probably Swollen Torsos. And also, what band should I talk about next? Have a great rest of your day, and bye.